It was time to choose. The rebellion was in trouble. Ravens were scouting for the secret rebel base. They needed a game changer. Pieces of the Sky Ripper had surfaced. Renato knew that using it could go catastrophically wrong, but he was sure he could figure out how to use it safely. Also, a temple had risen out of empty desert. The Emperor had brought the Sky Ripper pieces up out of ancient burial by his obscene rituals. Could this be where the Iblis stone was hidden? Someone better get it before he does, thought Renato. And also, his old friend Lapino needed rescuing. Of course, Renato had a pretty strong suspicion that Lapino had betrayed the rebellion. But could Renato really leave an old friend to the Ravens? Ah, Lapino. Apparently, the Mad Rabbit had sold a Pegasus that he did not exactly own. Lapino always wiggled out of trouble, given time. But he was out of time. Lapino's frantic message said that the Ravens were going to kill him for being a rebel spy. And that he had a clever plan. If the fleet reached him first, they'd string him up for that. Never mind the winged horse. Or so Lapino had told him over the far speaker anyway. Lapino had apparently managed to confuse the judge by arguing that he hadn't actually stolen the winged horse. He'd only sold it. But wait, where was the prison? The village was empty. Had everybody fled the Ravens? From the mystical East could make time itself slow for you. People were frightened these days. Just 2 weeks past, Renato had sneaked through an empty town and listened to the Ravens caw about the Emperor's new taste in ritual sacrifice. Once,
He'd found a Superman issue #1 in mint condition in a jar he'd broken. He planned to keep breaking things until he had the whole series.
Ravens didn't smell any better dead, Renato thought.
Renato looked around the empty village. How had he ever imagined Lupino was anything but a traitor? Any honest rabbit would have fled with the villagers. A doctor once told Renato that fruit was a placebo. But he felt better, and that was what was important. Haven't you always wanted to do that? How could you convince a firewall you're its friend?
chest full of old banana peels. There had to be more.
There was.
Oh, good! I need a new rug for my nest, said the lead raven. Ravens were landing everywhere. The advance guard. He'd better get moving. If they got to Lupino first, they'd eat him for breakfast. Or a snack. Ravens weren't picky. If they got hungry, they sometimes forgot to interrogate their prisoners. Even top spies like Lupino.
Well, unless he really was a traitor, obviously. Then they'd probably pin a medal on his chest. The mysterious sword from the East made you so fast you could catch a fly with your chopsticks. If that's what you really wanted. Bernardo remembered when he'd first stolen one of these. Good times. Lupino would betray him. But now Renato knew that. What would Lupino do if he knew that Lupino was going to betray him? Well, he'd concoct some crazy scheme, wouldn't he? That used Lupino's betrayal against him, and it would blow up in his face. Yeah. Maybe he was overthinking this. Well, that would be a first. He was practically sure he'd find something useful in one of these things.
Dirty and bloody, Renato finally reached Lupino. The rabbit was practicing his shuffle. Renato recognized the cards. It was Lupino's favorite deck. Oh, I thought you were in danger. I am. The ravens are coming. Oh, the prison thing. Right, yeah, we see this guard owed me 53 ducats, so we made a deal. They're very reasonable people, actually, for weasels. Now, I got a brilliant plan to kidnap Zenobia.
We capture Zenobia, we find out what she knows, and that's the whole war right there. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy.
Capture the Emperor's greatest general, who also happened to be a deadly sorcerer and, oh, his only daughter? That would be worth it. On the other hand, he could still get to the core of the Sky Ripper, even if he couldn't get the whole thing. It must have great power. To make the Sky Ripper, the Transcendent Emperor had wrapped an armature around the eye of a god. Bernardo had already let that armature slip away to save Lupino's life. But even its core, the eye torn from a god, surely they could fashion a great weapon from that. The core of the Sky Ripper? Lupino's excited. That's an actual thing that we could just go and get. You've been busy.
He sure had. Bernardo told him all the things he'd been up to. Soon they got to talking about old times, about wages they'd won and lost, and scrapes they'd barely got out of. It was good to be back with his friend. True, the core was capable of terrible, uncontrollable destruction. But this time, he was sure it would work great. It's beautiful here, thought Bernardo. It was nice to be back with his old war buddy. All right, Lupino was a traitor. But still, he was good company. If only he had some way to break the ice, or convince it he was a friend.
My God.
It's full of stars. He's hit, he thought. Boy, someone has spent a lot of money for a graduation present. Think of all the artisans he was creating employment for. Truly, he was a job creator.
There was something sour in the air. Like the earth had ruptured over something that had been fermenting for a very long time. Ooh, what's there?
You almost never saw wild gogglers together like this. The toads had to train them not to peck each other to death. So these had to be imperial gogglers. That meant ravens were up ahead. Building these platforms was so expensive, they'd run out of budget for guardrails. Once you try it, you're hooked. sensed the jewel's power. He had a feeling they were going to be great friends. Renato felt wrong all over. He could feel an almost palpable sickness in the air. And if the land could have tumors, they would look like these monstrous crystals. The forest was quieter than it had been. There were insects, but few birds, if you didn't count the ravens. Renato smelled sick animals and dying ones, but no healthy ones. And getting a bad feeling about this, Renato thought. Maybe Lupino was right. Maybe he should have kidnapped Zenobia instead of coming here. Where did that go to? Ooh, sparkly, thought Renato. Can't stand the heat, he thought. Stay out of the flamethrower. Everybody who wants to die, raise your weapon. All right. As he held the radiant icosahedron, Renato felt queasy, like dozens of tiny worms were nibbling his insides. It wasn't healthy to be so close to the eye of a god. How could he use it? He could take it to the observatory. The scientists there could tell him how to harness its ancient power.
But honestly, Renato ached to get away from it.
He brought the core back with him to the Farfarer. But honestly, Renato ached to be rid of it.
"Tell you what," said Lupino. "I'll take it to the observatory. You attack the Imperial outpost." The Imperial outpost was a vital communications node. Taking it could shatter the Empire's ability to coordinate. And it would be full of secret plans and maps and maybe even rebel prisoners. It was a good target for a hero like Renato.
But what if Lupino lost the core to the Empire? That could be a good thing, couldn't it? Was Renato ready to take that risk? Maybe it was better if he brought the core to the scientists himself.
"Trust me, Renato, you won't regret this. I'll treat the core like it was my own baby daughter."
As the Farfarer dived towards the Nexus, Lupino was jumping up and down with excitement. "Stop rabbiting around," Renato said. Lupino just stared at him. The moment the ship landed, Lupino leapt off the ship.
As Lupino vanished into the wilds of the Nexus, Renato vaguely remembered Lupino had a baby daughter, didn't he? And he told her mother he was going out to get some Easter eggs, and he'd never come back. But Renato was relieved not to carry the core anymore. He was already feeling better. And who knows, maybe this time Lupino would get it right. And if Renato could take the outpost, he'd have access to all the Empire's communications in the sector. Right?
Don't look down, he thought.
Sometimes, Renato really hated inanimate objects.
Imagine getting a horse up in one of these things. He would be cursing a blue streak. There were a lot of shiny, smooth, curved with leather, buckles, and kind of smelled, You know what? Never mind. Yes, there was also ore and other useful stuff. Let's focus on that, shall we?
Renato caught his breath. His joints still hurt, but he couldn't feel the poison in his system anymore. He'd let the armature slip out of his hands to save his friend Lapino. Of course he had to let Lapino take the core. The rebellion needed every man doing his duty. And the rabbit would be no good taking on an Imperial outpost, right?
The rebellion's time was running out. The intel he would collect from the outpost would give the rebels a small edge in the final battle. But the real game changer was the core. And that was in Lapino's paws. Renato hated playing second fiddle. Hey! Hey, a workbench! He could try out his new bling.
Renato took the outpost with a song in his heart. Soon, he was stuffing his sack with key messages from and to the fleet. Then the far speaker toad chortled a new message. The observatory had been sacked by ravens. Lapino and all the scientists had been taken to the mountains. Why? Why had he trusted Lapino again? And now the Empire had the core. Renato hailed the rebel base to warn them. But their far speaker didn't croak back. Was the base under attack too? Lapino would have to wait. The core would have to wait. Renato had a very bad feeling that something was going terribly wrong at the rebel base. Its location was secret, but secrets can be discovered. There were Imperials everywhere in the ruins, and dead civilians. The ravens were killing everything in sight. Renato was relieved to see no rebels among the dead. Maybe the secret base was still secret, but there were huge burn marks on buildings. What monstrous weapon was the Empire using here? The core had great power. Had they harnessed it somehow, even though they didn't have the armature?
to be something useful in these things, didn't there? He missed her. Not Zenobia, Hypatia, the kid's mother. Renato had never thought he'd date a librarian. He'd always figured himself for the barmaid type. But then, he'd never figured the library of Ubar would have comic books, or that Hypatia would know anything about them. He missed her. Renato had rescued Lupino and sacrificed the armature. He'd saved the one over the many. Then, he'd abandoned Lupino to save the rebel council, sacrificing one to save many. Well, if I ever get out of this alive, he told himself, I'm gonna have a talk with me. Renato wondered idly if people who had built these poles had really, really long tentacles. Renato wondered if it wasn't cheaper to build bridges and stairs. This chest was filled with old concert t-shirts. And something useful. The ravens. Nobody said they were original. The new pathway made Renato curious. This jewel was more than sparkly. It had arcane power and an engraving. To Cindy. He could smell charred flesh and hear screams. The ruins were on fire, but the Ravens had rigged up the core as some kind of burning ray. They wouldn't need to know the secret location. They were burning everything. It was killing them too. Their black feathers littered the path. He would have to take the core from them. It was the last thing he wanted to do. When Renato went to the china shop, for some reason the owner was always nervous. Slice the wings off a fly in the air. Not that he would. It's sort of mean, really. said Ronaldo. In your next life. Anyone ever tell you have a lovely eye? No? The rebel base seemed quiet. That was good. Also, it seemed to be burning. That wasn't so good. Maybe I should follow my nose, thought Renato. As the last raven fell, Renato felt worse than he ever had. The core was killing him, again. The council members cautiously came out into the smoke. "You saved us," croaked the speaker. They would put the weaponized core deep in a cavern, she promised, where its poison could harm no one. They would heal him if they could, she said. No, he's a weapon now. We need one. I'll lead the charge. "It will kill you," croaked the speaker. "I guess it already has," Renato said. She bobbed her head gravely. "When all this is over," she said, "we'll name our new capital city for you." He flew towards the Imperial fleet, a myriad ships in disciplined formation, waiting for the signal to destroy the rebellion forever. Behind him, the rebels were charging. If he failed, they would die, and so the final battle began. Everything hurt. It was unpleasant to fight this way. With each blow he struck with his sword, he felt weaker. Yet each time the core fired, it got brighter. As if the heat from the burning ravens and buildings only fed its hunger. He wondered where Lupino was. Wasn't he supposed to be in the battle? No. He'd been captured, hadn't he? Oh, Renado's mind was smoky now, like the burning fleet. He hoped this wouldn't take long. What's behind? Door number 2. His sword food teacher used to say power gems were cheating. Stupid old fart. Felt like Tarzan. Reynardo-opolis. Vulpus Major? Lando Nardo. They were going to name a capital city after him. Well, he just wished he had a better name. Where was Lupino? He missed Lupino's bitter outbursts. Or did he? Lupino had gotten him into this mess, hadn't he? The core was a wonderful weapon. It swept fire across the fleet. Ravens exploded in its gaze, and with every heartbeat, it grew brighter. He would die, but he would die every inch a hero. Spectacularly, changing history like the legendary heroes of lore. Or was it yore? He couldn't remember anymore. There was an inscription. No spitting.
Renato fell to his knees. The Emperor's bodyguards were lined up before his ship, fierce ravens all, and Zenobia. She was conjuring. He could not take another step. All he could do was fire the core. The ravens, Zenobia, the ship, all burst into flames, disintegrated, and blew away. So they had won, after all. The core grew brighter. He shielded his eyes, but he could still see it through his sleeves and through the flesh of his arm. And then he felt heat, as the fire grew to consume both fleets. And then he felt nothing. And he hadn't learned anything new this time. He'd done the same thing twice, yet expected a different outcome. There would be a way to win. Renato could feel it. He'd have to explore choices he'd never made before he could figure it all out, though. And with that, the book's pages fluttered to the beginning once again. And he fell. The clouds parted over the Isles of Boreas. It was time to choose. The rebellion was in trouble.